NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States. And in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Only 24 hours stands between us and the NFL draft, and we couldn't be more excited to be here with you, bringing you our final thoughts and predictions entering the big draft day Thursday. We're going to talk about, the biggest scenarios involving the draft, looking at the biggest what-ifs for the Bengals in the last 3 years and revisiting them today, and looking at some best and worst-case scenarios the Bengals could have tomorrow. Welcome into the final pre-draft podcast edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad joined with you once again with the crew, Mike Neislick and Andrew Gillis. And as we've been saying on this podcast, and as I will keep saying on this podcast, make sure you sign up for our Cincinnati football newsletter, Strictly Stripes newsletter. I'm getting it mixed up with our Subtext service, which I'll tell you about later. But yeah, our Strictly Stripes newsletter, it's easy. Go to cleveland.com/newsletters. It's free to sign up. You get a newsletter in your inbox every morning, giving you the latest updates, news, analysis, and opinion on the Bengals from me, Mike, and Andrew. So, yeah, like I said, make sure you go to cleveland.com/newsletter. So, guys, we have talked for weeks and months and days about who should the Bengals pick, where should they prioritize certain positions. We've had talks time and time again. So, really just jumping into it, you're sitting Thursday. We're watching the Bengals make their pick. I guess there's a 2-part question. Well, I'll start with the first part for each of you guys. The first part I want to ask is, the Bengals are making their pick, like I said. What is the best case scenario you imagine happening for the Bengals on Thursday night in the first round?
I think, in my view, I think there's kind of a perfect blend of, best case or best player available and positional need or at least positional value. So I look to a guy like a Myles Murphy, Kalijah Kancey, a lot of people are really excited about him and a lot of people are really scared by him. But, with Murphy, I think, you get a productive college player, a player who tested well at the combine. I just think that Murphy kind of gives you a nice boost to your pass rush and one that you probably need. So, I think I would kind of say if you were to put a name on it, I would say Myles Murphy. If you weren't to put a name on it, I think you would have to look and say, all right, so you have obviously the 4 quarterbacks, Stroud, Young, Levis, and Richardson are going to go early. You probably would want Hooker in that top 27. You would want a quarterback to go early, maybe earlier than expected, just so you can kind of push everyone else on the board. So I think, like I said, a name I would put as Myles Murphy. I think that's a really, really nice pick for the Bengals. But if you're kind of talking best case scenario, I would say, you need quarterbacks early and, you probably need, you need Bijan to go. You need some maybe off the board picks early.
You're saying Myles Murphy at 28? I had that in one draft, but that was before that pro day he had that was delayed because he had been injured. He had started kind of sliding on drip boards, but that sort of rebounded his stock. I don't see I mean, I guess that would be best case scenario because it seems really far fetched. I mean, I think they could make that happen if they traded up. And I talked about that in a story today I wrote, that, one best case scenario, one way to win the draft would be sort of not being as precious about that future draft capital and making a move like that, whether it's Murphy or somebody that you sort of believe in. Because like I said, I think you keep saying it the last couple of months, one or two players away. And this draft is, supposedly, reading all these different GMs say, there's only 15 to 20 first round graded players overall. So to get those, Bengals would either have to have somebody fall back or try to trade up. And they don't have a long history of trading up, barely any. So I'm not sure that's a likely one. For me, the other one is just getting, best case would be drafting one of the top tight ends and running backs in this draft. And I think that's pretty doable thanks to that deep tight end class. I don't think you have to necessarily take tight end or running back in round one. I think you could do either or and get one of the best in sort of round 2 or 3 at those other spots. But I think there's I outlined some like different combinations. You talk about Michael Mayer and Zach Charbonnet, or Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, or some, those type of combinations, or Darnell Washington, sound, like I think that's the clearest way to upgrade this team, because I don't think any first round pick on defense upgrades this team outside of a guy like maybe Miles Murphy that could come in and play some snaps. But if you're drafting a corner, you're drafting him to be a backup. If you're drafting him a safety, same kind of deal. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
So you mentioned the Bengals haven't traditionally traded up in the first round, and you are exactly right. The last time they traded up in the first round was 1995. They had the number 5 pick in the draft, and they traded that and the number 36th overall pick to the Carolina Panthers, who were an expansion team, if you remember. That was their first season. For the first overall pick, they picked Kajana Carter. I'm not going to get into that because you could argue he's one of the biggest busts in NFL history. But then as far as modern-day history goes, the closest they've gotten to that was in the first round of the 2012 draft when they traded Carson Palmer to the Raiders the year before. They got a first-round pick, in the following draft, which was 2012. That's how they got Dre Kirkpatrick. I think that was kind of a toss-up pick. But then they also got Kevin Zeitler with the pick they already had planned at 27. Well, actually, no, they were supposed to be at 21 and traded down to get the 27th pick to the Patriots. So they do trade down, as I mentioned there, and they've done that with the second round. But, you mentioned, Mike, a defensive pick wouldn't really be successful, unless it's someone like Miles Murphy. And so this is kind of the second part of the question I want to get to, not just for you, but, Andrew as well. What's a worst-case scenario for the Bengals in the first round? Is it picking a defensive guy not named Miles Murphy? Is it getting a guy that has a lot of red flags? What is a worst case scenario in the first round?
To me, it's loading up on depth on defense in terms of just trying to shore up those positions. I think you could do that in the later rounds. I'm talking specifically with your first 3 picks. I don't think they should be conservative in this draft. If they trade back, I'm okay with that. But if they trade back and draft a corner and a safety or something like that, or a corner and an interior defensive lineman, I think you're selling this current roster short because you need guys that I think can elevate your roster. And I'm not sure how much those guys do that right off the bat.
Andrew, what's a worst case scenario for you? If you're the Bengals, you're at 28. When you're looking at that, what's the worst case scenario that could happen for them with that pick?
Yeah, I think it would be a trade up. I'm actually pretty much diametrically opposed to Mike in that kind of philosophy. I don't think you should trade up. I think that there's obviously some numbers there about how trading back kind of gets you more kicks at the can, if you will. And there was a really good point today made on Twitter by Ben Baldwin. Because there was a lot of talk today about the Commanders not exercising their 5th-year option on defensive end Chase Young. And, he kind of made the point, the new CBA, which started in 2020, it's made the 5th-year option fully guaranteed and expensive. You can, if you make more than 1 Pro Bowl, it's a lot of money. If Joe Burrow had made 2 Pro Bowls, His 5th-year option would be worth $32.4 million. So it's a really expensive deal. So the 5th-year option to me, I think at this point might be a little overstated. So I think, you can still get some good value by trading back. So I think trading up and then you end up with a player, it's kind of a 2-leg parlay here. You don't just trade up, because if you trade up and, you draft a player who's going to start immediately, you can stomach that. But if you trade up and you go get a Miles Murphy at 22, at 21, if you trade up and you get a Michael Mayer at 20, I just don't think trading up should be kind of what this team needs to do, because you only have 7 picks. And I think, Mike's made the point, this team needs to try and find guys that can win. But I think you could also make the case that you could do that by getting 9 different players and saying, all right, we're going to go into this season with some, some reinforcements here and guys that we think can play. And, because you're going to need depth throughout the year. So I just think that trading up for this team right now, especially kind of with the contract situations coming down the line, I'm just not sure that's the smartest play.
Well, how many?
You made the point.
How many first round draft picks have the Kansas City Chiefs had over the last 7 years?
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Up if you can give some podcast filler time.
The answer is 4, and 2 were last year.
Wow.
Okay.
So
they also have Patrick Mahomes, though. So.
Well, they traded up to get him too. They traded a future first rounder.
Well, yeah. So that's the thing. If you're going to trade up, you need to do it for a guy who's going to massively impact your roster. Like, you made the massive trade up for Mahomes in 17. You don't have one in 18. You don't have one in 19. You pick a running back at the end of the first round in 2020, and to me, I know a lot of people were high on him, but to me, that was kind of always clear that was a disaster. You don't have one in 21, and then you have 2 last year. So if you're going to do it, you've got to do it for a player who can help you immediately and is at a position of value. Otherwise, I don't think it makes sense.
Right, but why wouldn't Miles Murphy sort of fit that bill?
Because the thing with Murphy is that I would worry about him playing immediately, because if you I think that there's kind of a way to do both here, right? I think that there's a way to draft for the future, to set yourself up long term, but also to kind of end up with a solid draft class where you have some depth, you have some starters, and if you trade up for Miles Murphy, don't think of it as trading up for Miles Murphy. You go from, we did it in our mock draft the other day, 28 to 26 was the 4th, on the trade chart. So I don't know, what if you move up from 28 to 23rd and you're giving up a 3rd round pick, a 1st, a 3rd, and a 6th next year or something like that. Sure, if you have plans to play him, that's fine, but you're also giving up. In the 2nd round, you're all right, well, running back, tight end, we need one of them. What do we do? And you kind of have to make that decision, because then you're not picking until the 4th round. So I just think that you kind of have to look at it as what you're giving up too.
It's all dependent on execution, right?
Right.
If the Bengals had traded one of their 4th round picks in 2019, those players would have been Brian Finley, Renell Wren, and Michael Jordan. So, it's I don't know. I think being precious about picks is sort of nice in theory, but you're already at a Super Bowl caliber roster. You're going to be for a little while because of, you've said Joe Burrow is, that's your window, right? So why not go all in now? Why worry about a 4th round pick that, are, really the chances of them working out historically are much less so than, 1st round picks or early 1st round picks, especially at certain positions. So, I don't know. I think being conservative all the time, because he's not done the opposite, right? And his draft history is, Duke Tobin is more spotty, than people, now say, because obviously the last 4 years have really worked out. But there were long periods of really not great, picks. And so I don't know. I just feel trying to get a sure thing isn't sort of the worst thing in the world.
Sure, but in 2018, this team drafted Billy Price in the 1st round, and their second round pick was Jesse Bates, and their 1st, 3rd round pick was Sam Hubbard. So there are kind of success stories there too.
Well, Price was a bust, though. I wouldn't go that far. Price was a bust. He's not there anymore. He got traded.
No, that's my point. That's my point, Mohammed. Like you pick at 21 and you draft a player who doesn't really work out,
Right,
but then you get a player like Jesse
is
James and Cam Hubbard in 2 and 3.
Now's the time to take a swing. You're not rebuilding. You don't need 10 picks. You don't need 9 picks next year. You need like 2 more players or 3 more players that like can be, a 10 sack guy or somebody that could really elevate your roster. And I think sort of just kind of saying, well, we need to be careful. We don't want to, we don't want to screw up our depth in 3 years. I mean, I don't know. This is really not really? That's the argument against it? It's like, I don't know. I just see it as like, you need the guy now. You need somebody now. Like, what if Joe Burrow gets hurt in 2 years and never plays again? Like, you're going to probably be kicking yourself. You held on to that first rounder, number 28, and didn't, when you had an opportunity to sort of get somebody better.
Sure, but what if you can move into round 2? What if you move into the early parts of round 2, pick whoever, pick up an extra third, then all of a sudden, your second round pick taking a Jahmyr Gibbs might feel a little more palatable. And then you have, I don't know, at 30, let's say the Seahawks, because they have a lot of picks. The Seahawks are at 37. You trade back to 37, take Jahmyr Gibbs at 37, pick up an extra third and whatever else that's going to cost. And then all of a sudden, I think you can still fill those needs where, okay, now you have Jahmyr Gibbs. You still have, let's say you pick up an extra second. I don't know. You take Jahmyr Gibbs.
I'm not saying that scenario is a bad scenario. I think Gibbs will be gone, but that's the early second round. But my point is more that just to rule out trading up because of X, Y, and Z in this position, I think would be, and he's kind of talked about how he still doesn't like it. Duke Tobin, that is. I just think is sort of crazy to me that you wouldn't sort of view this year differently. And I'm not saying the alternative situations are necessarily always going to be bad. Like, I think trading back could work depending on who you get. But I just think that future draft capital right now should be viewed slightly different than it was, 3 or 4 years ago.
I don't know. I just think that's too short-term thinking because, I mean, it's harder to win the Super Bowl than it is. This team is more likely not to win the Super Bowl than it is to win the Super Bowl.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean,
just based on odds. But
just based on odds, like, yeah.
Well, what about beyond odds, though? Like, are you saying that from a gut feeling or just strictly based on the odds?
Well, no, strictly based on the odds because, like, I mean, you can say that the Bengals have, the best team in the AFC, but I mean, they still have to play the Chiefs. Like, they still have to play the Bills.
You could say that this roster is never going to be better than it is right now because you're going to have to dedicate 50. Well, I mean, at least probably 80 million towards Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. So your talent pool is not going to get better. So right now would be the time to, be aggressive because you're going to have to be like in 3 years. Then 10 picks, I think, becomes more important. But this year and next year, I think you have the flexibility to sort of say, like, well, we need to get this one. We need to get this next one. We were so close these last 2 years. This is as talented as our roster is going to be.
Well, I guess the last thing I'll say on this then is that it's mitigating disaster, essentially. Because, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a name here. Like, Mike, throw out a name for a guy that you would trade up to 19 for.
Well, but I mean, Murphy's the example, right? I think we were talking about him. Like, if he falls flat on his face, yeah, it doesn't work out. But I'm saying taking the swing is not bad, right? Like, yeah, I mean, all these scenarios could fail miserably. So, I mean, really, we'll judge it in 3 years. But I think taking a swing now makes just a whole lot more sense than sort of a conservative approach.
That's fair. And I'm just saying that, like, I think if you're going to trade up, you had better be damn sure that this guy is going to be a stud because, if I mean, you made the point like, hey, like this team, eventually you're going to need picks, but not now. But sure, but if you miss, like if you go up to 19 and get Murphy, or if you go up to 17 because you love, Lucas Van Ness, or you love Joey Porter Jr., which by the way would be hilarious. But like if you do that, like if you're going to do that and that's a miss, then you're up a creek because, you're probably only going to have like 4 or 5 picks from this draft that you can, realistically rely on. And those guys are going to be mid to late round guys.
Oh, well, the interesting one would probably be Bijan Robinson. Like, would he elevate that? Like, if he's
Yes.
as good as advertised, that could I think the Bengals might regret not taking a swing like that. I mean, I know running back's not sort of thought of now as like the big deal, but like, if he's a game changing guy, some are comparing him to Saquon. That's somebody too that I think fits that mold where, on paper, people, running back's not it, but in practice, if you insert him into a Bengals offense with the talent that it has, I don't know, man, would be pretty good, right?
Wait, you say Saquon?
Barkley?
Oh, you mean Saquon? I was about to say, I've never heard Saquon.
Saquon,
I used to say Saquon.
It's his identical twin brother. He's really good at football, too.
How have we not heard of Saquon? You know something that we don't. You're the real insider here. No, not to cut you off there, but
Saquon's headshot and there's like a mustache with like glasses on. He's got a hat. Yeah, love that.
Kind of
love
like
that image.
What was when Eli Manning did that series with ESPN? What, like, he wore a mustache, he had like a mask on. What was his name? Like, he made a name and was like with the Giants players practicing. Like, have you guys seen that? He like literally gets in a costume. I don't know the name, but like I've seen the clip.
Wait, when he tried out for Penn State?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, when he tried out for Penn State, Chad Powers. Yeah, it was. I remember that because that was a segment they had on the Monday night game when the Bengals played the Browns. Like, that was a pregame segment they had because it was Halloween, obviously. So yeah, I guess there's a Chad Powers out there that's like Saquon Barkley's twin brother. So I guess really just to kind of like summarize what you guys are saying, Andrew is saying, be smart, be focused, don't try to get crazy with it in the first round. Mike is saying, why not go crazy with it? Even if you go for a swing and a miss, at least you're not sitting 3 years from now saying, well, I should have taken that swing. Because like MJ said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So Mike is saying, take the shot. Andrew's saying, hold on to the ball and play it safe. Is that what I'm hearing?
Essentially.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to wrap up our draft discussion for tomorrow's big day, and we're going to go back in time for a little bit, but in a fun way, looking back at some of the big what-ifs with the Bengals' last 3 drafts. But don't go away. We'll have that for you right here when we come back right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
So you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're hunting for a super rare first edition vinyl of a band you're obsessed with, when you're supposed to be working. But this site you tapped on seems pretty shady. And Daryl from IT just jumped up from his desk. Oh no, he's coming your way. It's a good thing built-in malware protection keeps you safe and sound. Not from Daryl, though. Sorry. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
All right, thanks for staying with us on this final pre-draft edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Before we continue our draft discussion, we want to remind you guys to sign up for our subtext service, Cincinnati Football Insider, where you, the fan, the listener, and every other adjective in between, you get to stay in tune with us as we send you to your phone all the latest insights, news, analysis, and discussion. We literally discuss things with you before we get to social media or before we even write for the web. It's easy to sign up. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals. Click on that blue banner at the top of the page. It's $4.99 a month, but you get a 2-week free trial to start, and you can cancel it anytime you want in those 2 weeks. So sign up today at cleveland.com/Bengals. You will not regret it. And our subscriber base is growing, so make sure you join the Cool Kids Club because you're going to have fun with the cool kids, being us. So my fellow cool kids down the block. So we've been talking a lot about the Bengals draft strategy, and I want to kind of wrap up sort of just, the best worst case scenario discussions we've been having by pretty much, I wanted to ask you this earlier, and I wanted to kind of ask this now. We talked about best worst case, but like, what would a surprising move be? It could be good or bad. It doesn't have to be either or, but like, what would a surprising move be in the first round? Is it a certain trade? Is it a certain pick? Like, what would surprise you in the first round?
I think it's hard to kind of say because there are, the Bengals have kind of put themselves in a position where there's not a ton of, position groups that, would truly stun you. I mean, if the Bengals draft, it doesn't sound like there's going to be a linebacker that's going to go in round 1. So if the Bengals draft a defensive lineman, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised. Safety would be a surprise for sure. But that would be Branch, the kid from Alabama. Sounds like he's going to be gone, but who knows? He might still be around. So that would kind of be a surprise to me. So there, but again, corner wouldn't. What if you really like Keely Ringo, or somehow it doesn't sound like Joey Porter. If Joey Porter gets by the Steelers, Joey Porter Jr., I mean that would be crazy. I know the Steelers need an offensive lineman, but I know they kind of like to do that. So, a corner would be, fine. I think really the only position that would truly stun me would be safety and receiver. And with receiver, it would kind of have to be more than just, hey, they drafted a receiver. It would kind of, it feels like it would be a little off the board, considering Addison would be gone, or assuming Addison's gone, Zay Flowers is gone, JSN is gone. Running back would be mildly surprising, but I wouldn't be floored by it. So, yeah, there's not a ton that would surprise me, but I think safety and receiver kind of have to top that list.
Real quick, would you be surprised if they picked Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round?
Well, I just said, the running backs mildly, I think would be the word for it. I wouldn't be floored. I wouldn't do it. I kind of wrote today that I don't think Jahmyr Gibbs would be a good pick at 28. I know you need a running back, and, I've kind of made the case before that you might need 2. But, I just, I don't think Gibbs is a good pick at 28, considering that, is Gibbs really that much of a difference maker compared to, Zach Charbonnet you can get in the second round, or, Keandre Miller or something like that. I just don't know if the juice is worth that squeeze, considering it's basically you're making a trade. I mean, if your first 2 picks are going to be tight end and running back, would you rather have, Kincaid or Mayer and Charbonnet, or would you rather have Gibbs and Darnell Washington, or
Luke Schoonmaker?
Yeah. So there's a couple different options there, but yeah, I think Gibbs would be a mildly surprising pick, but I also think it'd be a bad one.
What would surprise Mike Neislick then?
Just if you kind of, ignored sort of the positions of need, like I've said. I think they need it. They keep saying you need 4 running backs on the roster. They don't have 4, and Joe Mixon's status is kind of up in the air. They have 3 tight ends, and none of them really do the things that Hayden Hurst did last year. So unless they got some crazy trick up their bag that's not going to involve the draft, I think that those are your positions of need going in the draft, and you have to address them in the first 3 rounds. If they don't do that, I'd be surprised.
It's funny. I feel like we're talking about all these big names like Mayer, Kincaid, Robinson, Gibbs, Mozzie Smith, Kalijah Kancey, who, by the way, speaking of surprising, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals pick him because, obviously he's good, but, I'd be more surprised if he falls that far. However, if, somehow he falls that far and he gets passed up, then, I'd be very surprised by that. I guess it depends on who the Bengals pick, but, if supposedly the future Aaron Donald is at that pick, I don't know how you say no to that, but I think, what would surprise me is like I said, we're talking about all these names, and then somehow they draft Brian Branch, and I'm looking at that this is Dax Hill over again. I mean, Dax Hill wasn't super surprising because people knew the Bates contract negotiations weren't going well. That just only confirmed it, but no, this would be way more of a jaw dropper than drafting Dax Hill, because Dax Hill, he ended up making sense because now Bates is gone. But speaking of Bates and speaking of previous draft picks, this is something I've wanted to talk about for so long. But like I said, guys, there's just so much to get through with the combine and the draft and everything this offseason with free agency. And I love asking what-if questions. And there's 2 what-if questions I want to ask to kind of, put this podcast to a wrap. And the first one, it sounds so simple, but I think there's a lot to this more than people realize. It's 2020. The Bengals have the first overall pick. The favorite, the odds favorite, and just general favorite is Joe Burrow. and, the Miami Dolphins call and say, hey, like, we want that number 1 pick if we give you a 5 and whatever second, third round picks. Or maybe the Chargers are like, hey, we want to take that number 1 pick and we give you, I guess they were number 6 plus whatever other draft picks they want to give. So let's say Duke Tobin says, okay, what's cool with us? They trade down to, 4, 5, or 6. Either of those teams trade up to get Joe Burrow, and then the Bengals end up with a Justin Herbert or a Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, again, it's a big what-if question. I know it's a loaded question, but, like, if either of those guys were drafted, Herbert or Tagovailoa, would the Bengals be remotely anywhere close to where they are today as a contender?
Anywhere close, yeah. I think you kind of saw that the team has been built up around. Obviously, there's kind of a butterfly effect thing there where, hey, does Jamar Chase still end up a Bengal? This, that, and the other. But, assuming everything is the same, if you could just kind of replace Burrow for Tua, I think you're kind of where the Dolphins are, where, okay, you need a couple strong off seasons of improvements, but for now you're kind of floating around a wild card team. I'm really high on Herbert. I like Herbert a lot. I think that if you had Herbert, I'm not saying you would have been to the Super Bowl and been to back-to-back AFC Championship games, but I do think that there's a really good case that if you had Herbert, you're still really good, and you're still one of the top teams in the AFC. There's a reason why everybody talks about the Chargers every year as kind of a breakout candidate. They've got some good players, but they've also got the quarterback figured out, and Justin Herbert's going to get paid here real soon too. So, if you had Herbert, I think you're in the same ballpark. Tua, not really.
Mike, you're a big Justin Herbert guy. Do you think Herbert could have had the same trajectory as Joe Burrow if he came to Cincinnati?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Tua's injury history too hasn't helped them, especially now with these concussions. So, that's part of why his trajectory I think isn't as upward facing or upward looking as Herbert. But yeah, Herbert, a lot of the coaching decisions there in San Diego, they've had some real issues. I think he's been held back and not helped like Joe Burrow has in Cincinnati. I think they could have gotten, maybe not the top line production of what Joe Burrow's done, but pretty darn close to it with somebody that, has a very similar, skill set.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I actually think, I'll be honest, like I'm pretty high on Justin Herbert. I was very skeptical at first because, there was a debate over, is, Herbert better than Burrow? And I still think, again, I know it's a debate that's not going anywhere for a while. Like, I think Burrow's still better than Herbert, but I mean, Herbert, what he doesn't have, and this is not a knock on him, he just doesn't have like the sort of killer instinct that Burrow has. But I still think as far as like decision making,
sounds like a knock on Herbert that he doesn't.
Well, no, I mean, like, it's not having a killer instinct doesn't mean that like you're weak. Like, I think you can still be good, but it's just the difference between being great and good. Like, Herbert is good. Like, he's a great player. He can win in this league. Like, I think he's gonna do well with the Chargers. He did well last year, besides the playoff game, obviously. But with Burrow, I think it's just that killer instinct that, made the difference on a lot of moments that took the Bengals to the Super Bowl. Like, beating Chris Jones on a sack in last year's conference championship. Like, getting sacked 9 times against the Titans and still winning that game. Like, the throw he made to Tyler Boyd against the Raiders the week before that, that was like basically the difference between winning and losing that game. Like, I don't know if I see Herbert making those plays, which is why I say, I think Herbert takes them to the playoffs. Do they make it far? I just don't know, and I just don't think so. But, yeah, I mean, with Tua, and this is with respect to him, I mean, I feel for the guy. He's gotten hurt so much. But, I mean, even if he plays well, like, how long does that really last? Like, does he maybe take him to the playoffs like he did this year? Maybe. I just don't see how far they get, like, assuming he goes down and then you have Brandon Allen starting in the playoffs like Skylar Thompson did. So I don't know. But this is the last question I want to kind of ask about the sort of what ifs. And this is an even more spirited debate that I think you could still have to this day. The year after that, it really came down to, are the Bengals going to pick offensive tackle Penei Sewell from Oregon, or are they going to go with, Burrow's old teammate, Jamar Chase? We all know what happened. We all saw the result. No one's going to dispute or argue that. But what if they did pick Sewell instead of Jamar Chase? Like, I mean, again, another loaded question, but to kind of break it down, what really simply put, like, do the Bengals make the Super Bowl if you pick Penei Sewell instead of Jamar Chase?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it was certainly a gutsy pick. Everybody saw the meme that kind of circulated on Twitter of, Joe Burrow and, Jamar Chase. But, I think, I don't know. It's a good question. You almost feel like you have to say yes just because T. Higgins is still around and Tyler Boyd's still really good. But, I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. And I'm not sure the answer to that.
Yeah, because I mean, there's other dominoes, right? It's not just replacing one player, and so what other receiver do they land? It's like, what's the corresponding move? I think it's those kind of what if scenarios. I mean, that's what like Marvel Comics doing, like, what if Wolverine didn't get adamantium? I
think that all the time, Mike. I can't believe it.
Those are actual comic stories that they've written, and they go various places. So it could take you anywhere. Who knows?
So the domino point to that. So let's say, okay, they pick Sewell and they need another wide receiver because, they're not bringing back A.J. Green. He's 33 years old. He's out of his prime. Maybe you trade up your second-round pick because obviously they picked Jackson Carman in the second round. Maybe you draft up and you don't get him, and because at that point you don't need him. You got Sewell. So instead of getting him, you trade up and maybe you get a Rashad Bateman, maybe you get a Kadarius Toney, who were both drafted in the first round. So you trade up to get a late first-round pick. You get Bateman or Toney instead of Chase. And then at that point, you have one of those two, Higgins and Boyd. You have Sewell, presumably playing right tackle instead of Riley Reif and Isaiah Prince, who, Reif got hurt. Prince was a disaster with respect to him. But then as far as the dominoes go, like, here's the thing. It doesn't change everything else that happened from there. Like, Trey Hopkins is still getting cut. Quentin Spain is still getting cut. Like, you're still bringing in Ted Karras and Alex Kappa to replace them, and you're drafting Cordell Volson for, depth on the left side. And, the only thing that changes is you don't get La'el Collins in free agency. So is that money used to get some?
I don't think that's the only thing that changes in this scenario.
No, it's not the only thing, but I'm saying these are things that we know for a fact doesn't change. Like, we know they're not going to get La'el Collins. We know they're still going to get those other linemen after they cut the others.
I think.
Well, think about it. Why would
is
Quentin?
Possible. Anything is possible.
Mohammed, the Bengals will see the butterfly effect. Like, again, like, that's kind of the argument here. The Bengals could draft Penei Sewell, and the world could have ended. We don't know. Something could have happened that ended the world. It's just there's so many different permutations that come out of that. It's just impossible to say.
How did we go from, like, cutting Trey Hopkins and Quentin Spain to the world ending? That's a pretty far jump.
There's so many different outcomes possible.
Well, as a Muslim, I have my own perspective on how the world's going to end, but I'll save that for another day. What I'm saying is, assuming they played the way they did in 2021, I mean, they were terrible. Like, they're not in the NFL anymore. I'm just saying, I don't think Penei Sewell being there is going to hide how hideous those other guys were. Jonah Williams is Jonah Williams. I guess maybe another domino effect. And actually, here's another question about that, because it's not the only thing that changes. So if you bring Sewell, he does pretty good and he's still healthy. Do you still bring in Orlando Brown? Like, do you bring him in? And do you consider having Jonah Williams compete with Penei Sewell? I don't know. That's a good question.
I can't even.
Hey, I'm looking at all the scenarios here. Trading up to get a receiver, like not getting La'el Collins. Do you still get Orlando Brown? Like, these are all real ripple effects. I think they don't bring in Orlando Brown. I think they just look at it as, like, we drafted Penei Sewell. We trust Jonah Williams. Why would we have him compete with Sewell? But, like, obviously La'el Collins got hurt, and they didn't have much continuity before Collins, with Isaiah Prince and Riley Reif. So that's why they bring in Orlando Brown. But see, this is why what-if questions are the best, because you either sound like a genius or you sound crazy. That's the beauty of it. My very last question, and maybe you guys don't have an answer to this. This is just your all's personal perspective. What would you say is the most exciting draft that you've seen in the last decade, or just really in your all's lifetime, even beyond this last decade?
Oh man, there's a lot. I love the draft. It's maybe my favorite event on the NFL calendar. I really love it. You think back to, the draft in 2007 where Brady Quinn falls, and the drama of the green room, I think helps. The 2018 draft in recent memory, I just think because of the quarterbacks, because Lamar falling, that's there. The first draft I ever really remember watching, and I think this is probably the answer, is the 2004 draft. You had the Eli drama.
I don't remember that.
What was going on there? I'm trying to think of the 04 guys. Like Eli gets drafted by the Chargers and gets traded to the Giants. Phillip Rivers gets drafted by the Giants, traded to the Chargers. Larry Fitz, top 5. Sean Taylor, top 5. D'Angelo Hall, top 10. Ben Roethlisberger was like 12th or something. Jonathan Vilma was somewhere in there. Like that draft was Kellen Winslow was there too. Like had a lot of names, had a lot of really exciting moments. So I say 04 just, for personal aspect, but also I think if you kind of look back at it, you could probably do one of the 30 for 30 that ESPN has about the 83 draft. Kind of feels like you could do one about the 04 draft as well.
I agree.
I've been, working the event in some way or capacity, for 10 plus years. So they all kind of blend together. And in terms of like that, historical stuff is not my forte. I have a terrible memory for years like that. So I got nothing for you.
I think for me, that's a good answer, Andrew. I'm a little bit younger than you, and I was not into football at that time, so I don't remember that. For me, I'd say the most exciting one was probably 2016. I mean, there's a lot of really good players that came out of that draft, not just in the first round. I mean,
well,
you got
16
Jalen Ramsey.
was why am I blanking on his name? The offensive tackle from Ole Miss.
Laramie
Tunsil, yeah, the bong mask thing.
Yeah, I do remember that. That's part of why it was memorable.
There was a lot going on so I do remember that. That was a fun one. And by fun, I mean, I felt terribly for him, but it was certainly a lot of intrigue.
You had him. He ended up being pretty good. You had Ronnie Stanley, who's been really good for the Ravens, and then Chris Jones in the second round. Jalen Ramsey, who's a future Hall of Famer. You got Tyreek Hill, who's another potential future Hall of Famer. Derrick Henry, Joey Bosa, Michael Thomas. And then, you think about, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, being the 1-2 punch. How those picks shaped their legacies. What happens if, the Rams get Wentz and the Eagles get Goff? I don't know. That's another good what-if question, which I'm not going to entertain that. But, you kind of look at that and say, man, two quarterbacks that were picked who both went in interesting directions. Both both had teams that went to the Super Bowl, ironically, in back-to-back years. But Wentz obviously didn't play. He was hurt. Goff did, lost to Brady. Really, yeah, I don't think it's forgotten about, but it's definitely memorable for sure. That's a good one. Well, we've reached this point where we have gone through all of our pre-draft podcasts. So now for the next 3 days, we're going to bring you everything you need to know, recapping the Bengals day 1, day 2, day 3 picks. So late tomorrow night, if you are up like most people will be, we will have a post-first round podcast for you, breaking down what happened Thursday, what that means for Friday and Saturday, and we'll do the same until the draft is in the books. So make sure you tune in. Once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We will see you Thursday night / Friday morning.